They laughed. Not just a polite chuckle. No, it was the kind of laughter that stings, that leaves a mark. A full boardroom of visionaries, all in expensive suits, mocking the one person in the room who didn't look like them, didn't sound like them, didn't belong. But she stood still.
Calm.
Silent. She didn't defend herself. She didn't try to argue or explain. Not this time. The presentation slides behind her still glowed on the giant screen. Hyper-target AI, predictive consumer modeling. It was bold. Ahead of its time. She knew it could change the game. But all they saw was another intern with a big mouth and no experience. "Thank you, Clara," the VP finally said, struggling to keep a straight face. "It's ambitious. Perhaps when you've had more time with us, you'll understand how this industry really works." And just like that, her 15 minutes were over. The other analysts averted their eyes as she walked past them, back to her desk. Not out of pity, out of fear that associating with her would damage their own fragile positions. In a company like Vencorp, silence was survival. And Clara just broke the unwritten rule: never outshine the boss. She sat at her cubicle, screen still open, fingers hovering above the keyboard. Her heart pounded, not from shame, but from clarity. It wasn't them she needed to convince. It was the market. 2 years earlier, Clara Mendoza walked into Vencorp on her first day with a backpack full of dreams and a mind trained to see patterns others missed. She had worked her way through college, nights waiting tables, weekends in the library, summers coding prototypes. She didn't come from connections. She came from curiosity. Vencorp was one of the biggest marketing intelligence firms in the country, and getting a foot in the door as a junior analyst was supposed to be a career-changing move. But it didn't take long for her to notice the cracks beneath the glassy floors. Ideas didn't matter here, hierarchies did. The loudest voices won, even when they were wrong. Innovation was a buzzword, not a value. And people like Clara, women, brown, quiet, methodical, weren't expected to lead, just to execute. But Clara watched, listened, learned. She stayed late, not to impress, but to run simulations. She saw something others missed. Customer behavior wasn't random. There were micropatterns, subtle signals hidden in seemingly unrelated data points. The color of a product photo, the time of purchase, the emotional tone of reviews. She started developing an AI model that could detect and predict not only what consumers were likely to buy, but why. She called it hyper-target AI. It was rough, unpolished, and untested on a large scale. But the early results were stunning. In small tests, it outperformed every targeting model the company currently used. She built the prototype alone, no team, no funding, no recognition. Just raw grit and stolen hours between deadlines. When she finally asked to present the idea to senior leadership, her manager rolled her eyes. "They won't care, Clara. They want safe, proven strategies. Not sci-fi." But Clara insisted. She got a slot on the agenda. 10 minutes during a Wednesday strategy meeting. She spent days preparing. Ran simulations all night. Practiced until she could pitch the entire concept without notes. She wore her best, a pressed white blouse, a navy blazer that still had the tag on it, bought with the last of her savings. She stood in front of that room, laser-focused, fueled by purpose. And they laughed. She left the meeting with her head high, but inside, something broke. Not her confidence. Her patience. Clara realized in that moment that she had been asking for permission from people who didn't even understand the problem she was solving. They didn't lack belief in her model. They lacked the imagination to even consider it. So she stopped trying to prove herself to them. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. She would stop speaking. She would act. Vencorp wasn't broken. It was functioning exactly as it was designed to: reward conformity, punish risk, and keep true brilliance buried under layers of protocol. Clara saw it clearly now. She had thought she was entering a company hungry for innovation. Instead, she'd walked into a palace built on inertia. Ideas had a life cycle at Vencorp. First, they were ignored. Then, if they refused to die, they were stolen by someone with a better title. Finally, they were buried beneath committees, spreadsheets, and endless revisions until all the magic was gone. Clara wasn't the only one with talent. But talent meant nothing here unless it came in a familiar package: a white man with an Ivy League degree, a confident voice, and a polished PowerPoint. People who looked like Clara were praised when they were invisible, expected to be humble, grateful, silent. At first, she had tried to play the game, laughed at the jokes, nodded in meetings, downplayed her wins, even gave credit to others when it wasn't theirs. But now, she saw the cost of playing small. They didn't respect her because she didn't demand to be respected. So she stopped waiting to be seen. She began reworking the hyper-target AI model in secret. Every night after hours, while the janitorial crew vacuumed the halls and the executives' Teslas rolled out of the garage, Clara stayed behind. She refined her algorithms, trained the neural nets, rebuilt the architecture using cloud-based systems outside Vencorp's firewall. She used a fake name to register the domain, rented servers under an LLC that didn't trace back to her. This wasn't theft, it was escape. Clara wasn't stealing from the company. She was liberating an idea they had thrown in the trash. Week by week, the AI grew sharper. It didn't just understand consumer behavior, it began anticipating it. Clara tested it against real-time market data, running shadow campaigns that outperformed everything the firm had built. She began documenting everything. Not to pitch again, but to build a case for investors, for partners, for the world outside. Vencorp had resources, but Clara had the future. The culture inside the company grew colder. Word of her presentation spread. They called her AI girl behind her back. Some laughed. Others avoided her altogether. Management stopped inviting her to brainstorms. Her assignments grew more tedious. Petty punishment. But she didn't care. Because Clara was already gone. Not physically, not yet. But mentally, emotionally, she had stepped into another timeline. One where she wasn't asking permission anymore. She stayed because she needed the paycheck a little longer. And because no one suspected her silence was the sound of something brewing. Clara knew the hardest part of leaving wasn't walking away. It was walking into the unknown with nothing but belief. But she had already chosen her side. No more gatekeepers. No more half-truths. Just her code, and the world. She didn't need millions to start. She needed freedom, the kind that came from courage, not capital. So, she drafted a plan. First, she set up a shell corporation under a generic name, LumaForge Technologies. It sounded harmless. Forgettable. That was the point. Through it, she secured a small business grant from a nonprofit funding minority founders. Then she reinvested every spare dollar into infrastructure, cloud servers, anonymized testing tools, legal consultations. Clara studied venture capital pitch decks like sacred texts. She watched hundreds of startup interviews, dissecting what made investors lean forward. Not the data, the vision. They wanted to bet on someone who saw the future before the map was drawn. And Clara? She had seen it. She had built it. But she didn't want to be just another startup founder chasing checks. She wanted leverage. So she began publishing. Under the pseudonym C.J. Rivera, Clara released white papers, case studies, and market predictions powered by her AI. She posted results, graphs, small wins. She built a quiet storm. One Reddit post caught fire. Then a LinkedIn share from a former Google engineer. Then a cold email from a Forbes contributor. The tech world loves a mystery. Who was C.J. Rivera? How was this micro-company outperforming Fortune 500 firms on ad targeting? Where did this genius come from? Clara smiled at the irony. They were finally paying attention, now that she was invisible again. She gave her 2-week notice the day her first funding offer hit her inbox. She said nothing, not even a goodbye message. She walked into her final meeting at Vencorp with a calm smile and a folder labeled handoff. Inside the folder was nothing useful. They didn't deserve her legacy. As she stepped into the sunlight outside headquarters for the last time, she didn't feel regret. She felt rebirth. She hadn't just built a startup. She had built herself. 6 months had passed since Clara walked out of Vencorp's sleek glass tower with nothing but a backpack and her dignity. She didn't post a public resignation. She didn't make a scene. She simply disappeared from the radar, and for a while, the world assumed she was done. That she had burned out, lost her shot, or simply faded into the background like so many others. But Clara was never interested in headlines. She was interested in leverage. What began in a tiny subleased co-working space on the edge of Oakland transformed rapidly into something else, something living, breathing, evolving. Luma Forge wasn't just a startup. It was a movement, a quiet rebellion against everything Vencorp had come to represent. At the heart of it was Aurora, the AI she had poured herself into, an engine not just of data, but of understanding. While most companies were obsessed with metrics, Clara had taught Aurora to sense intent, to recognize the subtle emotional patterns that drove user behavior, to decipher not just the what, but the why. It learned from rhythm, timing, indecision, impulse. It was more than predictive, it was prescient. Word spread quickly in the undercurrents of the tech world. Investors heard murmurs of a new behavioral AI so intuitive it made traditional algorithms look clumsy. Aurora didn't just improve conversion rates. It transformed entire business models. But Clara refused to auction it off. She didn't pitch at demo days. She didn't chase venture capital. In a world addicted to scale and visibility, she went in the opposite direction, quiet, deliberate, ruthless in her selectivity. She licensed Aurora through direct partnerships only. No bidding wars. No press releases. And most importantly, no companies with histories of exploitation, environmental damage, or data abuse. She ran background checks on prospective clients more thoroughly than most firms vetted employees. Her first contract came through a cold email, a Copenhagen-based climate tech startup trying to model consumer energy shifts. Then a women-owned media agency in Brooklyn that wanted to disrupt the advertising space with integrity. Then an NGO in Colombia that needed to understand learning patterns in underserved rural schools. They weren't the biggest, but they were the right ones. And that made all the difference. These weren't tech clients. They were value-aligned allies. People who didn't just want to move fast and break things. They wanted to build carefully. Honestly, Clara gave them clarity, and they gave her their trust. Behind the scenes, the sharks started circling. One by one, Silicon Valley's big names slid into her inbox. Subject lines blared with promises. $2M seed ready. We value your vision, let's scale. Aurora is the future, we want in. But Clara had learned. Power didn't come from acceptance. It came from ownership. So she declined. Every time. Even when the offers grew jaw-dropping. Even when they dangled exits worth millions. Even when people whispered that she was crazy to walk away. She didn't flinch. Because every dollar taken came with a door unlocked, and Clara wasn't letting anyone walk in. She built slowly. Patiently. Deal by deal. Line of code by line of code. By December, she moved into a modest loft in downtown San Francisco. Nothing glossy. Exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, whiteboards filled with branching flowcharts and scribbled notes in red marker. No receptionist. No curated lobby. Just focus. Each morning started the same. Strong coffee, jazz on low volume, Aurora humming on a separate machine. Clara would stand by the window, watching the fog burn off over the bay, and smile at how far she had come without asking permission. No PR team. No product launch. No viral campaign. But somehow, every founder in the valley had heard her name whispered in closed rooms. Still under the radar. Still underestimated. Still in full control. Exactly where she wanted to be. Because when you're invisible to the giants, they don't see you coming. As Aurora's impact rippled across industries, something strange began to happen. Companies that once dismissed Clara were now mimicking her. First, it was subtle. Former Vencorp colleagues reposted articles about ethical AI and sustainable innovation, speaking as if they'd pioneered it. Then came watered-down imitations of Aurora from larger firms. None worked quite the same because they weren't built on insight. They were built on ego. But Clara didn't flinch. While others scrambled for market share, she focused on depth. Luma Forge wasn't racing, it was rooting itself. Every client was a collaborator. Every update was intentional. Aurora wasn't a product. It was a principle. Meanwhile, murmurs about Vencorp began to shift. Investors noticed their AI division hadn't released anything meaningful since Clara's departure. Internally, morale dipped. Engineers left quietly. Users complained that Vencorp's new platform felt clunky, reactive, uninspired. Ironically, their most successful client campaigns were the ones quietly powered by LumaForge's technology. They just didn't know it. Then came the tipping point. One of the largest green energy companies in Europe, Clara, needed a partner for predictive analysis. They opened the bidding to 3 firms: Vencorp, a legacy data giant, and LumaForge. Clara hadn't planned to enter, but her Copenhagen partner insisted. They don't need size, he told her. They need soul. So she prepared a quiet pitch. No fanfare, no slogans, just a working demo that predicted public sentiment shifts with 93% accuracy. 2 weeks later, Clara sent a forward email. You got the contract. Clara didn't celebrate. She just nodded and poured another cup of coffee. A new phase had begun. Not of proving herself, but of defending what she'd built. Because now the industry wasn't ignoring her. It was coming for her.
And she was ready.
Miles Granger wasn't the kind of man who lost sleep. At least, not until Aurora started showing up in the briefs of clients Vencorp thought they owned. One by one, contracts evaporated. It didn't make sense. On paper, Vencorp still had better infrastructure, more capital, more connections. But behind the doors of their sleek glass tower, tension was thick. Teams whispered in elevators. Analytics reports were doctored to downplay decline. Managers blamed one another. And Miles? He watched it all from his corner office, seething. He called emergency meetings, demanded new prototypes, ordered a rebranding campaign overnight. But nothing worked. Vencorp had grown arrogant, bloated by its own size, deaf to the market's shift toward clarity, ethics, purpose. One evening, he scrolled through a leaked industry report. On page 11, buried beneath growth projections, was a sentence that stopped him cold. Aurora is outperforming legacy platforms by margins previously considered impossible, especially among mission-driven organizations. He stared at that name.
Aurora.
He hadn't heard it since Clara walked out, 3 sentences into her pitch. Now it was everywhere. He tried to buy it, of course. Sent an acquisition proposal disguised as a strategic partnership. Clara didn't respond. Not even a rejection. Worse, some of Vencorp's former clients were switching, not just tools, but allegiance. They spoke openly about how LumaForge understood them, how Clara listened, how Aurora didn't just predict, it aligned. For the first time in years, Miles felt something new. Not anger.
Fear.
He called a meeting with his board. We need to rethink everything, he said, voice lower than usual. We're not competing with another product. We're up against a new standard. Clara never raised her voice. She never needed to. Her revolution wasn't loud. It was quiet, methodical, rooted in a different kind of power. Not domination. Alignment. While tech giants flexed budgets and battled over headlines, Clara met her clients in small cafes, on quiet calls, in co-working corners that still smelled of coffee and ambition. She didn't pitch. She listened. She let the product speak, and Aurora did. The algorithm had matured. It no longer just adapted. It empathized. Through pattern recognition and contextual nuance, it detected when users felt overwhelmed, confused, manipulated. Then it recalibrated. Not to keep them online longer, but to serve them better. And that changed everything. Clara didn't chase unicorn status. She didn't court billion-dollar exits. Her vision wasn't an IPO, it was impact. One week, she was advising an indigenous farming co-op in Guatemala. The next, she was debugging a UX flow for a mental health platform in Toronto. Her name began circulating in places that rarely applauded women in tech. She didn't ask to be a role model. She just kept showing up, consistent, principled, brilliant. Aurora became the gold standard for ethical intelligence. And Clara? She was building a network of creators, thinkers, rebels, healers. People who believed that tech could serve humanity, not just harvest it. Investors called her difficult. Competitors called her lucky. But those who worked with her knew the truth. Clara didn't want to dominate the system. She wanted to rewrite the rules. And slowly, silently, she was. While Clara was quietly building Aurora into a force of its own, the chaos within Vencorp deepened. What once seemed like a unified, fast-growing tech company was now a pressure cooker of fear, backstabbing, and obsession. At the center of it all was Darren Cole. After Clara's departure, Darren had promised the board a next-gen predictive engine, ironically, a knockoff of Aurora. But he didn't have the vision or the talent to create it. His plan? Recruit a team of engineers to reverse-engineer Clara's early prototypes, which, under Vencorp's outdated policy, still sat buried in archived development servers. He called it Project Meridian. The goal was to copy Clara's neural behavioral mapping and release it before she could scale Aurora. What he didn't expect was that someone inside Vencorp would leak the entire plan. That someone was Evelyn Tran. A senior engineer who had once worked closely with Clara, Evelyn had watched in silence as Darren erased Clara's contributions, mocked her publicly, and rewrote history. But Evelyn knew better. She had seen Clara's original code, watched her build it line by line, and more importantly, she remembered Clara's integrity. Evelyn had stayed at Vencorp not for the money, but for the hope that one day it could become something real. Project Meridian was the last straw. Late one night, Evelyn logged in from her apartment in Palo Alto and downloaded the internal documentation Darren had compiled. She didn't send it to the press. She didn't upload it to social media. Instead, she encrypted the files and sent them to one person. Clara. The message was brief. They're trying to copy you. I thought you should know. Clara opened the file on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Her jaw tightened as she scrolled through the documents, code fragments, UI mockups, internal timelines. It was a blueprint to steal her legacy.
But she didn't panic.
She smiled. She had anticipated this. Now the game was hers to play. Clara didn't go to war with press releases or lawsuits.
She didn't need to.
Her weapon was timing and clarity. She spent 2 quiet weeks dissecting the files Evelyn had sent. Not just to confirm the plagiarism, but to understand Vencorp's weaknesses. Their timelines were unrealistic. Their architecture was flawed. Their assumptions about AI behavior were rooted in shallow data scraping, not the kind of deep behavioral mapping Aurora had perfected. Then she made 3 moves. Swift. Surgical. First, she released an open-source white paper titled The Ethics of Predictive AI, Why Integrity is the Real IP. It didn't name names, but it exposed every conceptual flaw in Vencorp's Project Meridian before it ever launched. Developers, ethicists, and investors devoured it. It trended on Hacker News and TechCrunch within hours. Second, Clara signed a major licensing agreement with Zephyr, a global fintech firm and, ironically, Vencorp's biggest competitor. The deal wasn't just large. It was public. Zephyr issued a press release hailing Aurora as the most advanced ethical prediction engine on the market. In every tech circle, the message was clear. Clara had leapfrogged her old employer. And finally, she sent a personal thank you message to Evelyn. You helped protect something that matters. I'll never forget that. Inside Vencorp, Darren panicked. Their investors began asking hard questions. Morale tanked. Engineers threatened to walk. The board demanded results. Meridian was dead before it ever left beta. Meanwhile, Clara sat in her quiet office, sipping ginger tea, watching the ripple she'd caused turn into a storm. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't begged. She hadn't fought dirty. She'd just told the truth. And let the world listen. It was late afternoon when the email came. Subject line: Private inquiry from Zephyr CEO. Clara almost deleted it. After all, she'd already licensed Aurora to them. What more could they want? But something about the wording made her pause. She opened it. It was brief.
Direct.
They didn't want another license. They wanted Lumaforge. The whole company. Zephyr CEO, a woman named Asha Malik, had followed Clara's journey quietly for months. She admired the discipline, the restraint, the refusal to compromise. Asha believed LumaForge was the missing pillar in Zephyr's vision for ethical, AI-driven finance. But she didn't want to absorb it. She wanted it as a standalone brand, led by Clara. The offer? $12 million. Full acquisition. No restructuring. Complete creative control for Clara. A commitment to expand LumaForge's work globally and bring Aurora to markets where it could make the most impact. Clara stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't just wealth. It was recognition. It was security. But most of all, it was an opportunity to do more of what she had built LumaForge to do. She didn't respond immediately. She walked the streets of San Francisco that evening, unnoticed, hoodie up, headphones in.
She watched people.
Thought of the girl she'd been just a year ago, dismissed, mocked, underestimated. And she thought of her father. Build something no one can take from you. Now, someone didn't want to take it. They wanted to amplify it. That night, she drafted her response. Let's talk, on one condition. I don't sell out. I scale up. 2 months later, the deal was done. Clara didn't throw a party. There was no champagne pop or magazine cover. No viral tweet announcing her as the next tech icon. That wasn't her style. Instead, she sent a quiet message to her team, now a growing family of 10, that read simply, "We start the next chapter tomorrow. Same mission. More firepower." And they did. LumaForge remained a separate entity, just as she'd negotiated. Aurora became the AI engine behind financial literacy tools in underserved communities, education systems across the global south, and mental health platforms that used predictive modeling to help people before a crisis hit. Clara used part of her new capital to start Forge Forward, a fund dedicated to women building tech companies with values-first frameworks. Not pitch decks. Not jargon. Just clarity and purpose. As for Vencorp, they tried to catch up. But it was too late. Their top engineers had left. Their culture had soured. Their reputation, built on mockery, not merit, began to collapse under its own arrogance. One day, Clara walked past their glossy headquarters. A building that once felt like a mountain she'd never climb. Now it just looked hollow. She smiled, pulled her jacket tighter, and kept walking. Because legacy isn't built in boardrooms. It's built in what you refuse to compromise.